Rav said that he doesn't know how Yid can sit down to the Pesach Seder without learning the Gevuros Hashem from Maharal in Prague, who was my holy ancestors. So we were learning the third Torah yesterday, and I ran out of memory on my phone. Had to do a little bit of work to even get this recording back. We did, and it's posted yesterday. So we were in the middle of that one where he was talking about this question of why this number 600,000. He explained that 6 is a perfect number because it represents up, down, north, south, east, west, 6 directions. And the hundreds place and the thousands place are special numbers as well, particularly in Hebrew. You don't really have anything higher than that number, even though you have the term riboy, but that's an addition, it's not a perfection. So the term riboy, which means a myriad, it means 10,000, it is already itself perfect. And then also you have, it's already adding something. And the tens place, you don't have 6 tens, you have 60. You don't have 5 tens, you have 50. The same way that you have 500 and 5,000. And it's the same in Hebrew and in English. And there with that. Whereas the riboy, the 10,000, you don't really have. We don't have another word to get to a million. Which I don't think there's a word for million in biblical Hebrew. It's not modern Hebrew, milliard or million or something. Anyway, in traditional Hebrew, you don't have such a word. So, I believe this is where we're up to. At this point, we have 3 numbers. We have the ones place, we have the hundreds place, and the thousands place. Oh, so we already were there. Let's pause and find. You know what? Actually, let's just continue here where we are up to. So it says here. We'll just chazer over this. We'll go over this again. That's not a question, because if you understand, there's a difference between the number of that are in the tens place and other places in the numbers, because that's what we just said. You don't say 6 tens, you say 60. And similarly, we don't say 6, 10, 100,000. We count the tens place with the 6. We don't have such a thing. The way that the 100 is counted. This is the same guy. So the way you count, we say 600. You don't say 6 tens. You say 60. It's a different word. Therefore, you don't say 600. You say 600,000, right? We already said this over yesterday. We're just going over it again. The tens place, it doesn't have a place here at all. Therefore, the perfection in the number of 600,000 is very unique. There's also such thing that's very unique, and these are very clear things. And when the Jewish people got to 600,000, they got to their perfection that they were seeking, that they needed. And that's when they left Egypt, just like a baby in its mother's womb. When it gets to 9 months, that's when it's fully grown. The number of 600,000 is when the Israelites were fully grown. And furthermore, that since the Israelites are a unique nation, a singular nation, it is worthy for them to have this number. I think this is where we're up to yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. This number is a perfect number. It's it's known that everything that isn't perfect, that isn't whole, is only a piece, and it's not really one. Concept of unity is that it cannot really be divided, because if it's divisible, then it has another piece, and then it has addition. But the perfection that's from the side of the perfection that's in it, that is one. It doesn't have any other portion. And this is something that is agreed to, and it's certain. And since this number 6, it's a perfect number, it represents unity as well. And because of this, and in a certain way, my understanding is that's why, even though the Zionists use this symbol, and it's we don't use it anymore in our circles, the 6-pointed star, the hexagram. In any event, they call it the Shield of David, the Magen David. I'm not sure where that idea actually comes from, to call it the Magen David, but then the Shield of David, the Star of David, they call it. But it represents this unity, this perfection of up, down, left, east, west, north, south. And it represents that unity, that it's indivisible. And because of this, it's worthy for this unique and singular nation, that it's perfect in the world, to have this number, which is 600,000, as there was when, by the exodus from Egypt, as we read in Exodus chapter 12, verse 37. However, further on we're going to explain this more. In the end, it's worthy that the Israelites have this number 6 specifically, and you shouldn't think about the Israelites that died, the Hebrews that died during the 3 days of darkness, the plague of darkness, because since they were not worthy, they're not considered to be part of the Klal Yisrael. That's a very important lesson, that just being born Jewish doesn't mean very much if you don't live up to what it means. And it just means one has guilt, really. The one is liable, has responsibilities. So anyway, when the Israelites were at this number of 600,000 of the feet of the men, that's in addition to the infants, the Israelites came to their perfection, and they were similar to a fetus that's already fully formed, and then it's time for it to leave, to make its exodus, and not before that time. They didn't want to leave prematurely. That's why the Medrash says in the Tillim, that did it ever happen that God, it says in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 34, it never happened that God tried to take one nation from the midst of another nation. Meaning this is if when it says in the midst, it means as if they're in their innards, that they're inside, that they're part of the body. Like as if the Egyptians were pregnant with the Israelites. From the concept that the Israelites really were a part of the Egyptian culture until they became matured and fully formed, that then they were able to have their own identity in the midst of Egypt. And if we look carefully at this to understand this more, we know that the Egyptians were subjugating the Israelites in the sense of their main form. It's the whole reason that they're called Israel, Yisrael. Also, they were conquering them in the sense that they were called a nation, a people, and this is also on this concept of the material, meaning in philosophy, particularly Aristotelian philosophy, if I'm not mistaken, or some of the Greek philosophers spoke often of form and substance. And this is something that the Jewish philosophers, Jewish thinkers, often grabbed onto as well. And it's possible that it was some kind of a symbiotic relationship. It's not clear who really came up with this concept first, or if it was just convergent in this concept of form and matter. I don't remember the Greek, something huli, and morpha, if I don't remember, hulimorphism. In Hebrew, I could have that wrong, don't remember, but in the Hebrew, we say Surah and Chomer. Surah is form, and Chomer is the Homer, is the material, is the matter. And both of these were reached in the time of the Exodus, because every nation has both of these concepts. One is that they are an independent nation, they have an identity, that is their form. And the other is that they're special in the sense of their material. These two scriptures teach this concept in the sense that each one of these two things, from the side of the form and the side of the material, they were being subjugated in a very special way, in a rather horrific way, because that which is set aside from the sense of the form, the tzura, it doesn't affect the material. And that which affects the material doesn't affect the form. Because for example, material becomes worn out because of its lowly aspect, because meaning that we were under their power, under the subjugation, and so therefore we were subjugated to their bondage. But when it comes to the idea of form, that comes from the exalted nature of the thing, the special nature, that which makes it choshev, that makes it distinguished and dignified. And this distinguishing, dignified level, then they come to be jealous of them and opposing them and trying to conquer them politically and ideologically. And when the Israelites were in Egypt, they were under their control, under the Egyptian control, and they were slaves to the Egyptians. That's one thing. But then we add to this the suffering, that's the subjugation, that's another thing. So, meaning you could be enslaved without being abused. And the abuse that they suffered is actually something that's entirely separate from their actual enslavement. There is such a thing as someone being enslaved and not be abusive. It was just a part of the way of the world until quite recently. So this idea of and many very pious and slaves who appreciated what they had, even though it's very controversial to say such a thing today. But certain people, they felt it was an honor to be of service to someone who was an honorable person, meaning according to the cultures of those times. So Eliezer was the servant of Abraham. Eliezer had tremendous respect for his master. He considered it really to be an honor for him to be in service to Abraham, right? And Abraham did not abuse him in any way. But the abuse that the Egyptians inflicted on the Israelites, that's another story altogether. So this servitude, the enslavement, that in which they were under their power, that was a materialistic enslavement. That their material was enslaved constantly to the Egyptians, and that was that they didn't own themselves. They were owned by someone else. But when it comes to the tzura, to the form, this idea that the Israelites were a special people and they were distinct and distinguished, the people of the God of Abraham particularly, from this side, that is really where the abuse came. That's really where the subjugation, the suffering came. That the Egyptians made them suffer because it was the tzura, the form of Egypt, which was idolatrous and licentious, subjugating the form of Israel, which was pious and monotheistic. And these are two opposing worldviews and two opposing lifestyles. And therefore, God told Abraham by what's called the covenant between the parts, the bris ben Besarim, which is mentioned in the Haggadah, Genesis chapter 15, verse 13. It says, "You should surely know that your seed shall be strangers in a strange land, in a foreign land, and they will enslave them and they will subjugate them." Meaning both of these concepts are mentioned here, subjugation and enslavement and subjugation. Meaning the material aspect was the enslavement, being owned by someone else, that they were their slaves. And the spiritual subjugation, the tzura, the form, was that the Egyptians were controlling them and subjugating them in an abusive manner. So we see that the Israelites were subjugated in Egypt. It was both a physical subjugation and a spiritual, a formular subjugation, both in matter and in form, both in body and spirit. And when it comes to this concept of the form of the body, that this is what it means that they were under someone else's hand. That's what it means to Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 34, which we quoted before. Never happened that God ever tried to come to take one nation from the midst of another nation with tests and wonders and miracles and so forth. Meaning that when it comes to the side of the physical subjugation of Israel, that they were conquered under someone else's hand, God took them out from the nation that they were under their hand, under their power, under their jurisdiction. That's why our sages in the Medrash Shechatov Tillim says there's like an embryo that's inside of an animal, in the womb of an animal, meaning that this this embryo, is connected to his mother physically. So too, the Israelites had a physical connection to the Egyptians, that they were enslaved, they were physically owned by the Egyptians, that they were under their power. So that means that they were connected like an embryo, like a fetus is attached to the mother with the umbilical cord, so to speak. And then so when the Medrash says that, like when the shepherd puts his hand into the animal's womb, and he doesn't say that it's like the what do they call a woman who helps give birth. Now I know they call it doula, but there was another term, old-fashioned term. It's don't remember the term now. But the woman who helps the mother give birth, meaning it's not a comparison. Doesn't matter what the word is right now. I'll remember it later. But it's not the comparison of a human being, because an animal is something that's very physical. It's very materialistic. That's why it's being compared to an animal here. But what is that called? The woman who helps to give birth in the old days is anyway, from the side of the surah, from the form, so it says in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 20, V'eschem haitzimikar barzel. That's when we're talking about being removed from the crucible, from the iron crucible, meaning say that the Egyptians were conquering the Israelites and they were affecting them and they were purifying them, they were smelting them, like the fire affects gold that's in a crucible. And this is in the matter of form, not in matter. This is related to the form, because that's where the real suffering came from. And this is similar to the main form of the Israelites. They're compared to gold, because gold is this concept of the form that was purified and smelted. And then the Israelites, their main form was under the Egyptian power. Until, for the sake of for this reason, they didn't have any more connection to the one who was taking them out. And this is what it says, and I took you out from the iron crucible, from Egypt he took you out from Egypt, from the crucible, the iron crucible, to be for him a people, a heritage. That's from the side of their form, that the Israelites were a people and they were a heritage. And the next verse it says, the other verse it says, did God ever try to take one nation out of the midst of another nation? It only mentions as a nation, a goy, meaning that that's the physical aspect of the Israelites. So the general idea of this thing is that from the smallest side of the Jewish identity is the physical aspect, and in that way the Jews were enslaved to Egypt physically. And from the more distinguished side, that's the concept of the form, the Egyptians were controlling their energy and having power over them. So in reference to these two concepts, Scripture says, Tehillim in Psalm 114 verse 1. But says Yisrael miMitzrayim Beis Yankov ve'Amoyes. We say this by the Haggadah also, that when Israel left Egypt, the house of Jacob, from a people of a foreign tongue. It explains both. It mentions both of these aspects. And that both aspects left Egypt. It wasn't only a physical exodus, but it was a spiritual exodus. That when we say Jacob and we say Israel, that both aspects were enslaved to Egypt. The name Jacob, Yaakov, means the lower level. And it's the concept of the physical, the material aspect. That's why it's called Jacob, because Akev means the heel, as it says in Genesis chapter 25, verse 26, that he was called Yaakov because Esav was holding on to his heel. And the name Israel, Yisrael, that is the concept of the form. That's the more dignified, distinguished aspect. From where it says Kisarisa, that we fought, this is explained. So we finished that Torah. So thank you for watching. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe, comment. We'll have to think about if we're going to do the next one. All right. God bless. How do I turn this off? And feel free to comment below. How do I turn this off?